Well, thank you all for coming. Really excited for the discussion today. Another phenomenal panel. I say that every time, and I may have been involved in choosing the panelists. So, it might be a little pat on the back for me. But these guys are awesome, and I'm really looking forward to having the conversation with them. This is webinar number 9 of the series already, so we're actually nearly through it, which is great. A ton of awesome content. If you haven't seen the other sessions, feel free to have a look at those. My name is Jack Teal. I am the APAC commercial lead at Mayday. We're on a mission to mend month end for larger Xero businesses, beginning with the needs of those who are multi-entity. We're talking about intercompany recharges, cross-entity bank reconciliations, and keeping your intercompany loans in balance. All things that we're solving and very relevant to businesses that are focused on reporting and consolidations and all these kinds of bits and pieces too. As a little bit of background on me, I started my career as an accountant with PwC about 10 years ago, where I completed my chartered. I've then worked in a variety of smaller accounting firm roles, working with SMEs, SMBs, and obviously the Xero ecosystem as part of that. In the last 5 years, though, I've moved into a variety of different startup roles, once again, in the Xero ecosystem, which has been awesome. And through all of that experience, I guess I'm as bullish as ever about the strength of the Xero platform, and it's really great to see so many larger businesses succeeding with Xero as their accounting general ledger. What is clear, though, from my experience and over the course of time, is there's a lot of content out there for accounting firms, but a lot less relevant content for in-house finance teams that are running Xero and are growing and are scaling and are running into these challenges head on. So I'm really glad to be here on behalf of CFO TechStack, who are running the series with some extremely experienced individuals. So I might hand over to them now to introduce themselves so you know who they are. So Ryan, I'll go to you first if I can.
Thank you very much, Jack. And thanks everybody for tuning in. So I'm Ryan. I am the managing partner of a business called TWIYO Capital and Advisory. We're an early stage corporate advisory business with a particular lean towards virtual CFO. We're about 5 years in now. It came from my background of, I'm similar to Jack, I'm a chartered accountant. I worked at Grant Thornton. I worked in some multinational businesses, but in my mid-20s, I moved into startups and went on 2 prolific CFO journeys of my own right. And then a few years ago, sort of determined that, how could I amplify that? How could I work with more startups? And we started the business 5 years ago now, and we've worked with about 100 different startups in that period, have a team of about 20. And, day in, day out, we help SMEs make sure that they're making smart decisions around systems, around reporting, the way they're engaging with their stakeholders, their shareholders, if that's applicable as well. And naturally, that evolves into conversations around maximizing systems and what's available and how to do it in a best practice environment. We've been helping people do that for a little while now, whilst leaning on some of the experience. So that's me.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Nathan, over to you.
Hey guys, great to be here. I too started my career as an accountant. I started at KPMG. This was about 15 years ago now, so showing my age a little bit more. Did that for about 8 years, working with a lot of businesses, seconded out as fractional financial controller or CFO positions before moving into the startup world. I've been at startups, primarily at fintech manufacturing businesses for the last 8 years now. Used Xero very heavily in all the businesses, and both large national businesses as well as large international businesses. So I've been working with Xero for quite some time. Used Fathom a lot during its early stages, and I've been using it ever since. So I do love the program. I know I'm not supposed to be talking about it, but I do love it. I have been using it a lot. Most recently, I am the CFO for Send Payments and for Cake Equity. I am still the CFO there, but I'm moving out into a fractional CFO position as well at Boutique Business.
Great, Nathan. Awesome. Thank you. Stian, over to you.
Yeah, well, hey everyone, very nice to be here. So yeah, my name is Stian Horn. I am the customer engagement manager at Fathom here in APAC. I'm sure some of you guys may already be familiar with us, but just for those who aren't, well, Fathom is basically an app that's designed to simplify and enhance financial management. Our platform really boils down to 5 key areas: management reporting, cash flow forecasting, KPI financial analysis, consolidations, and benchmarking. And yeah, I'm here today to hopefully be able to shed some light on how an app like Fathom, when integrated with Xero, can provide added value for finance professionals like the audience here today, who feel that Xero alone might not fully meet their needs when it comes to management reporting, but without resorting to more manual, time-consuming, and not so scalable solutions like using spreadsheets, for example.
Yeah, I imagine there's a few people here who might be using spreadsheets, so it'd be good to get into the conversation and discuss that. Before we go over the agenda and I jump into asking you guys questions, a little bit more setting the scene around the series. So as I mentioned earlier, at Mayday, we're working with larger Xero businesses. It sounds like all of these guys have experience on that side of things too. And we're often looking, I suppose, talking to those customers, they're often looking for answers to two key questions. One is Xero still the right system for me? And two, how long is that going to remain the case? We want to, I suppose, shed some light on the ERP experience and right the wrong or right the myth that you can't scale with Xero. We've had clients say to us that the move to ERP is horrible and hectic. It's expensive, of course. We all know that. And that's before 58% of implementations fail. So we're seeing a little bit of a change of pace here. We're seeing larger businesses wanting to stay on Xero for as long as possible. We're seeing businesses move off of ERP back to Xero as well. So really, we just want this series to be as valuable as possible in writing that misconception and shedding light on when an ERP might actually be the only solution for you. So we really hope that the session and the series is valuable to each of you. It's not a product marketing webinar. It's not a product demo. There's a reason why I'm not wearing a Mayday t-shirt. It's all about adding as much value as possible around this topic of building an enterprise level system with Xero. So yeah, with all that being said, the agenda for today, very similar to our other agendas, but focused on reporting, will be what does Xero do really well in this space? What are the key challenges and growing pains that you experience as you scale up your business or as you grow, and maybe in size or in complexity? How can you then leverage the Xero ecosystem to help? What does a reporting tool actually do for you in this space? And then I think we'll have a really interesting discussion around Xero versus ERP towards the end as well, because I know Ryan and Nathan have a lot of experience in this space. At the end, we'll share kind of a top tip that you can take away. There will hopefully be a bunch of that you can note down throughout the discussion too. And then we've got some time for Q&A. So ask questions throughout. We can get into them as we go, but also we'll have a separate section at the end just to cover that if we need to. So with all that being said, Ryan, I want to start with you if I can, just to get your thoughts. You've obviously worked as a CFO in a number of businesses. You work with these clients now in your role as a fractional CFO, virtual CFO. So what does a growing or potential, if a business is here using Xero, they have growth plans, they have plans to scale, they expect complexity to rise in future, or maybe they're already feeling that now. What are their needs from a management reporting standpoint? What does Xero do well from a reporting standpoint? And then what are those pains or challenges that you see them begin to run into?
Yeah, look, I think for management reporting specifically, as things get more serious and more complex later on, there will be a need to report back more thoughtfully. One of the usual catalysts for that is to whether a business has raised capital or not. And then you've got to look and see, do we have new reporting obligations to shareholders? And then how do we make sure that they're being done right? Now, the issues that will eventually sort of come awry is that Xero is a really great general ledger, and it's really good for single entities. But once you get into we've got international subsidiaries, we've got multiple operating companies in Australia, then things start to get really, really hard. But in saying that, if you start to find ways to do the reporting consolidated in certain ways, you can actually meet the needs of all those stakeholders. I'll give you one example is for our clients that have that type of dynamic, we'll often produce 3 sets of reports at the end of each month for them. One will be a board report for the directors. One will be a management report, which will be potentially with some information redacted. And one might be a shareholders report, which might be on a quarterly basis, which may just be required at a high level. And we'll sort of try to meet the needs of those 3 different groups. And with Xero alone, I mean, all you're really going to get is a balance sheet and the P&L on a per entity basis, which you then have to stitch together in some way, and it's not really going to be 100% accurate. So I think you got to see, as things get more complicated, what are the different stakeholder groups and what do they need, and then is Xero going to cut it?
Yeah, perfect. So basically, what Xero does well in this space is quite limited, you're saying?
Well, I think Xero is, well, on that front, yeah, it is. I think
Yeah.
Xero is an amazing general ledger. I mean, the biggest thing that Xero has going for it is that it's a fantastic integration product. It's a platform. It's a foundation of your tech stack. Like when I talk to people, whether it's clients or other CFOs, and we sort of say, well, what are you using? And they say Xero, and we say, great, because we love Xero. But then they say, then it ends there. And it's like, but they're not using anything else. So, there's usually some type of mini tech stack that a business should use. They should use 3 or 4, maybe 5, but it should be a few different low-cost, smartly integrated products to almost emulate this mini ERP to stretch the value of Xero. When someone's just using Xero on a standalone basis, they're not really getting the value of the ecosystem. And so, what does Xero do? Its number one thing that it does the best is the fact that it integrates so fluidly with so many different products. That's my view.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's a lost opportunity to have a poll here to find out who's listening, who's just using Xero, but I'll digress. Nathan, I'm keen to get your perspective on this from your own experience. What have you found Xero to be really good at in this space, or do you just echo Ryan, or are there other pain points or challenges, or even specific things that you were trying to achieve that you needed an add-on for?
Yeah, so for me, Xero is an accounting-based software, and it's tailored towards accountants. So the level of information and the quality of the information is tailored towards a particular audience. Now, every leader and every stakeholder in the organization and external shareholders and investors and board members may not want that level of detail. So there's a level of reporting that may not be built and fit for purpose for that audience. So in terms of Xero, there's a concatenated view that we provide out of Xero to provide a level of detail that the leaders and the execs do care about. But that fine level of detail that you provide to an auditor, to your accountants, to your general advisory, to R&D, it's not necessarily built for every single audience. Those are the things that Xero does do well, right? Because every accountant has experience with Xero. And so when you're going to an accountant, if you're already utilizing Xero, it's very easy for them. It's a familiar software. They can pick up your book and they pick up your work quite easily without a lot of onboarding requirement. Where the limitation sits for me is the amount of information that the audience wants. Xero is very good at the retrospective view. It's very good as here's the performance of the organization. It's very limited in looking at the future focused, what's coming in the organization. And in my experience, that's where the more interesting bits of information that the leaders are craving, and even external investors, that's what they're craving. They want to know, great, you've performed well against your budget or your targets. That's absolutely fantastic. But what's coming next? What's in the next quarter? What's in the next year? And that's a limitation that Xero has. It's not built for forecasting purposes. Yes, you can import information, but it's limited in it and how variable it is. And as we know, in an FP&A environment, things change on a month-to-month, week-to-week basis. So you need to be flexible. You need to be constantly adjusting your variables, and then feeding them back into Xero, which is a bit of a pain point. So for me, I always live in the forecasting side outside of integrated systems because I need that flexibility and that level of complexity. The other thing for me that Xero has a limitation on is revenue streams. So in some businesses, you have a core revenue activity, and we can report on that one very well. If it's a very simple single channel revenue stream, it's very easy for Xero. Where the complexity sits, and to mirror Ryan's point, once there's maturity in the business, if you have different revenue streams from multi-channels, from different countries, from core and non-core revenue generating activities, that's where that complexity starts to get a little bit difficult in Xero. Yes, it can report on results, but segmenting and departments, segmenting that in terms of revenue streams or revenue reporting lines or cost centers becomes much more difficult in Xero.
Right. No, that's super interesting, Nathan, and I think you've nailed on a few key points. Stian, I'm keen to hear from your side. You know, you're having people like Nathan come to you or Ryan come to you and say, "Hey, I'm interested in Fathom for my business." Obviously, for these guys, it would have been a while ago that they had those initial conversations. But what are the key trigger points for businesses where they're kind of saying, "Look, these are the things we're trying to do, and we're running into issues just with Xero. So how can Fathom help?" What are those key trigger points that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, look, I think I need to sort of, as you say, sort of preface this by saying that obviously the stuff that I'm sort of hearing is obviously from customers themselves. But I think a lot of it is similar to what Nathan and Ryan is saying as well. One of the main ones being sort of getting what I guess we like to call sort of the visually engaging and sort of clear reporting out of Xero specifically. A lot of the time we hear that our customers use Xero to export P&L and balance sheets directly, and that's basically the extent of a lot of the reporting they do. But we know that for a large majority of stakeholders in the business, that's not necessarily the best way to narrate what's going on in the business from a financial point of view. So being able to actually create management reports that cater to the financial literacy of different stakeholders, that's definitely one of the key points. And I think for the rest is, like Ryan was saying, when you grow to a certain size and you're sort of in need of, say, being able to consolidate various entities' financials together, that's obviously a huge thing that people come to us for, because that's sort of the functionality that doesn't currently exist within Xero.
Yeah, I find that point around the being able to produce reports for different stakeholders is quite a good point. I think Nathan and yourself have brought up. So thanks guys for that. Ryan, I want to just throw to you quickly on a side question. I don't want to spend too much time on this because the session is directed at reporting and we want to stay focused on that. But we have a question from Narelle, which is just around, because you had alluded to the fact that you might want to have 3, 4, or 5 apps in your tech stack. If you're just using Xero, you're probably not getting the most out of it. So she's kind of just said, look, I use Fathom, but I'm interested in other software too. What are the other apps? I mean, I think the question is quite broad because there are so many, but how would you kind of answer that?
Like if someone's like just literally using Xero, like you kind of just got to walk down a few things, and I might mention a few things which may not necessarily be apps, but if you think about like this thing about payroll, like for example, Xero's payroll is fine, but I think KeyPay or Employment or Hero Pay, whatever they call it these days, is far superior. So you could have payroll as an integrated solution. Your payables automation needs to at least be done in HubDoc or Dext. Like that's just a no-brainer as well. And some people are just not using accounts payable automation. When you then look at things like reporting, obviously there's Fathom and there's Spotlight and other ones there, but you should have something there. Even on banking, you've got to look at things like Airwall-X as traditional bank alternatives as well, and they're fully integrated systems and highly efficient also. And then if you go further down, you can look at, is Xero, am I outgrowing Xero Me's expense management system? Should I use Expensify because that's far better and I can build in rules? Then how am I doing travel? And then you just sort of go through those there. And then inventory, have I outgrown Xero's inventory? Should I go and use Deer or Unleashed or something like that? So you get to this point where if you could be using 4 or 5 and Xero, and it's all working in harmony in a low cost environment. But those are the ones that I would sort of tip my hat to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. And I think, Narelle, if you haven't, the series as a whole, we've run 9 sessions so far, each of those on a different topic, each of those with a different vendor kind of supporting it or alongside. So without spending any more time on it today, feel free to check out those other sessions, check out the apps that are associated with them. That most of them are the ones Ryan's mentioned, a few sessions still coming up with a few others that he also alluded to. So definitely check that out. Cool. I guess that's a nice segue into the ecosystem side of the chat today. So, I mean, Ryan, maybe I'll go to you first here around your own experience in how to actually figure out what solution you need for this. I think we're all aware, or maybe we're not all aware, but there are a lot of tools that are in the broader reporting space. So, what are the key elements that people should be thinking about for their business to figure out which app's going to be right for them? And why was it that you ended up with Fathom as your kind of choice product? What were the key elements it did really well?
Yeah. So, I mean, once you get to the point where you realize you need better reporting than what Xero is doing on a single entity basis, then you've got to start to do a bit of research, right? You've got to triangulate a few views. I think, if you're working inside a business, making relationships with other financial controllers or CFO and see what people are doing, coming to events like this is really helpful. I would suggest that everyone has their eye on the Xero App Store. I still randomly go there every couple of weeks and have a look around. The reviews are helpful, but I like to look at things like G2 Crowd, other places where you can go, oh, well, I didn't know that software existed. And just because it didn't feature on the Xero front page doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So you can try to go and look at as many as possible, and then doing some trials is important. You got to trial out a few pieces of software. We retest every now and again, making sure we're using what we think is the best in market as well. So I think having that broad view and getting as much exposure is really important, because you will find that some do some things better than others. And then Jack, to your question of like how we arrived at Fathom, very early adopter, which has been helpful. We had a lot of particular use case around working with franchise groups where the benchmarking part is really, really quite superior. I would say on the other remaining sides, it's simple and effective, which is really, really important. And being able to produce like one board report for a group in one place where you can show company by company and everything together in the way you want and include non-financial KPIs. I think it's just, for us, been really comfortable and easy in that regard. I've found that other systems can be a little bit more complicated and not as strong a user experience. I think they've also invested heavily, like bringing out the forecasting in the last couple of years. You can tell that they're trying to solve for more than just reporting, which I think is a serious value add as well.
I mean, I think that's one of the key things you've spoken about it within the app Fathom, that they keep bringing out new features, and it's worth considering. Look, if you looked at something a couple of years ago and maybe it didn't meet what you needed or didn't have what you wanted, it's always worth having another look. And that goes to the ecosystem as a whole, where, if there was a pain point that you couldn't find a solution for a couple of years ago, have another look, because there's often, more and more businesses are going on to Xero, more and more large businesses are on it. And so the more volume there is, the more reason there is for a startup to go out and actually solve those
Well,
problems.
it's exactly right. And you'll find that, like, the more you get involved in the community, the better, right? I mean, I've spoken to David and I remember when I think Fathom had an external party do some customer engagement work maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but like the amount of times that we've sent tickets in or having questions and engaging and finding out is something on the roadmap or not, and actually trying to help push it up. Like, I mean, and you find that, startup software these days are moving at a lightning space. Like, the more you talk to them, you actually can help partly influence the way that the product is being built. And I think with Fathom, I've been pretty involved in that over however long it's been. So that's been really helpful to know what they're trying to build and what's going on, opposed to being a little bit passive in that. I think you need to sort of take another step forward on that and try to get as involved as possible and find out who's who in the zoo.
Yeah, great. So, I mean, Nathan, I'm keen to get your thoughts here. I mean, I'm trying to think of a good direction to take this. We don't want to talk too broadly about the ecosystem, and Ryan shed some light on how he's gone about finding Fathom as the solution. He spoke to some elements, and I think you did too, around why it's so good, because it's a simplicity element, easy to use, fast, all those bits and pieces. Does that mean that if you've got complex requirements, that you might be looking at something else? How do you see that?
So that's a good question, actually, because there's a reason why I use Fathom, and there's a reason why I have to integrate and feed Fathom information. So our use case for Fathom at the start, and same as Ryan, we were a very early adopter of Fathom, was that the visual side of Fathom was absolutely fantastic. It was very simplistic. It was easy to read, and from a management perspective, that was a very, very good tool. And the fact that you can tailor reports based on Xero. So Xero, like Ryan said, it's a fantastic general ledger system. Once you've got the general ledger according to departments, you set the right chart of accounts, Fathom can pick all of that up and tailor the reports based on those specific GLs. So it's managing and integrating that one very fast, and it's absolutely fantastic. The complexity for me and why I had to go outside of it is back to the forecasting side. So I've spent a lot of my early career building models in Excel, And I like a fine level of detail in terms of revenue modeling, especially because revenue, unfortunately, is the thing that everyone as a business leader cares about, because that's the measurement of success for post-commercialization businesses. Now, those revenue models with the drivers become very, very complex, because it's not always just accounting-based measurements. There's marketing-based measurements. There's branding-based measurements. There's BDM partnerships, depending on what type of business you're utilizing. So all of that information comes from different systems, and we use Excel currently for small-based businesses who don't need an ERP solution to collect that information, collate it, and then feed it back into the drivers that then Fathom will ingest to produce the reports. That level of complexity, it's great to see the forecasting side in Fathom, and I've played around with it, but unfortunately that level of complexity was, for me, is easier to sit outside, to build into a model in Excel and feed back into Fathom.
I mean, I think that's like the metaphor, microcosm, or anecdote for the broader Xero v ERP conversation as well, right? Because I'm sure when we talk about something that's simple and easy to use, we're talking about something like Xero, and potentially in your case, or in this case, Fathom's forecasting. But there's always a situation where, hey, once you reach this certain level of complexity, or you're this massive behemoth company, or you're dealing with all of these edge cases and nuance, yeah, maybe not. But for the vast majority of circumstances, it's going to work. So, Stian, keen to get your thoughts on this. You know the ecosystem quite well. So what do you kind of see? Maybe you can touch on points Nathan made or Ryan made, or add your own here around, how should people be leveraging? Yeah.
Yeah, look, I think the guys are very much correct. Sort of to start with what Ryan was saying, the whole sort of, using the App Store for all it's worth, getting in touch with support teams. And I really want to sort of emphasize that point as well, that if you are actually looking for a tool to do a specific function or touch on a specific area, if the tool doesn't do it, right? It's like with Fathom, we love to hear when people, find things in our product that we currently aren't doing, to the standard that they want to, or maybe we don't provide that function. Because the way we develop our product is based on what we hear, customers or prospects saying. So, I really, all I want is for people to, when they have a chat and they hear we don't do it, just, give us that sort of note of like, hey, it'd be really cool if you guys could do this, this, and that. And then we actually take that, on board, and, we give it to product and our developers, so they also can see that, look, this is what our customers are after. I think to Nathan's point as well, sort of around there, where, it's when developing like a product like Fathom, it's all about sort of finding that balance of, how complex can we make it for the users that want the complexity, but at the same time sort of keep the user face and the user experience, intuitive enough so that the product can work for, a cafe owner down the street, as well as a, 700 entity organization. And I think I would be naive to say that, Fathom is going to be the best fit for every single business out there. I definitely do think that there are, cases where you might need a more granular forecasting tool, or you might, as we sort of go into, at some point, maybe an ERP is what makes sense. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's I feel like what Fathom have done is sort of create a product that at least tries to sort of hit on both those areas of providing sort of the granularity where need be, but also being a tool that, you don't have to be a data analyst, you don't have to be necessarily a tech expert. It's fairly easy to sort of pick up, integrate your Xero account, and start generating those forecasts and reports right off the bat.
Awesome. Cool. All right, guys. I think that's a really nice place to finish the ecosystem part of the conversation. We have touched on it throughout the chat around this ERP side, and throughout the series, we're making sure we cover off on this within every session. Before the call, we were having a quick chat, Ryan, Stian, and Nathan and I, about this, and all the guys have, well, especially Ryan and Nathan, have some really interesting experience here. So I might kind of leave it open, Ryan, for you to just have a chat to the audience about your experience with Xero v ERP, what you've seen, what you've experienced here.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm where I used to work at Thomson Reuters. We implemented an ERP system. We were using SAP for sales to gross margin for years, and then we used another system for the rest of the general ledger. It was horrific, and that worked as a multi-year program, and then it failed, and then we were working at night trying to run both of them at the same time. So that was a pretty hard start in my early 20s. And then I also had another experience where we were looking to implement an ERP, and it didn't garner board approval after spending a long time working on it. And I think I said to you guys beforehand that there was almost this rite of passage for finance professionals to want to tick off an ERP implementation into their CV, but I don't think it's quite what it is on the outside. And I think that my personal view on this is that you should really try to extend the life of existing systems and software to their fullest. And if you think that you need an ERP, I think you should make sure that you've fully asked yourself and looked at the App Store and made sure you've gotten value out of that, because it's a process not to be underestimated, and the cost. And I have this personal view that if that money can be redirected into growth, then that's a win. So sort of delaying, if there's an inevitability around ERP, delaying it as long as possible that it still remains efficient is important. And I made a comment that you also want to consider what the exit orientation of the business is. Is an ERP going to be important if you do eventually want to exit? What would potential acquirers be looking for? Could that ERP need to be unwound if someone else has a different ERP, and just going, do we need it? Like, is there an ROI on this? Those are sort of like my experiences and things that I would, intrinsically ask myself and look in the mirror before really going down that path, but there might be examples where you have to do it, right?
Yeah. Well, there's obviously companies that are much larger that are always going to be ERP. It's about finding that, and I think that's why this conversation is so valuable, is because I think people have probably just the line in the wrong spot as to where that next step needs to be. Nathan, keen to hear from your experience here. What have you experienced from a Xero v ERP side?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I definitely do agree with all the points that Ryan has mentioned. An ERP system is super sticky. Like, once you've integrated into an ERP, it's so hard to unwind. So you're sort of at its mercy if you do make the decision to go down that route. The purpose of an ERP is an efficiency gain. It's not a growth generating activity. It can support growth, but in itself, it's not a growth activity. The cost to benefit ratio really needs to be measured. And I think Ryan said this, and I'm just going to reiterate, it really does need to be measured. And I will also say that it's not, in my experience, it's not for every industry, because the ERP is meant to tie in all different departments from the organization. You tie in your sales, your HR, your financial management, your manufacturing, if you are a manufacturing business, your supply chain. That's the purpose of an ERP, a single source of truth. If your industry doesn't require it, I wouldn't explore it. I wouldn't even think about it. You got to think about what outcome you're trying to achieve. Do you have a need for it? Does the outcome warrant the exercise? Is the benefit of performing an ERP integration, is that outweighing the actual cost to integrate? These are all questions that you should ask. And the one thing that, from my experience of integrating an ERP, is that the cost assumption is always very high. Once the engagement's complete, there's an education that needs to be done for the entire organization. And sometimes that is underestimated. In my experience, when we did go through this, once the engagement was finished, which was a 12-month engagement to integrate an ERP system, there was a lot of confusion. From the multi-offices that it was integrated to, there was a lot of education. So we ended up having to hire an external consultant to then support the integration into the individual offices. So that cost in itself outweighed the initial scope, and that was, it was out of budget, and in my experience, it wasn't the most efficient exercise.
Yeah. I mean, you've both given some really good perspective on how hard it is or how expensive it is as well, and that it really should be considered only for very particular circumstances where there is a clear ROI. I guess as a question from a reporting standpoint, can either of you speak to what reporting capabilities an ERP has versus, a group of businesses on Xero using something like Fathom? Is there actually a benefit from a reporting standpoint, or should you expect it to be worse experience or better experience? I don't know if either of you have been there.
I'll quickly go if you don't mind, Ryan. In my experience post integration, the one benefit out of the ERP solution was that it was the single source of truth. So to pull in reporting from the different departments to different stakeholders, you didn't have to go looking for the sources of information in various systems, in various apps, in various locations and files. You know, in smaller scale up or even enterprise level organizations, information exists in an Excel, in a SharePoint, on Google Drive, wherever it is, and there's someone pulling it together into a report. The purpose of the ERP is the single source of truth, and that the massive benefit of the integration post that was it was very easy from a reporting perspective to pull all financial and non-financial KPIs from one system. So there was one team to manage reporting. That was a good benefit.
Cool. Ryan,
Look, some of the benefits, I mean, some of the benefits when we were using ERPs is that, you know, it comes down to really complex affairs. Like, you know, sometimes if you're trying to do special purpose financial reporting and general purpose, or you're trying to extend out this concept of cost centers into regions and into other subcategories, and you want more categories and more sort of breakdowns, you know, that's when it starts to then get really useful. But maintaining that is obviously a real pain. So, yeah, I think it's when you get into that, you know, you got to acknowledge that, you know, Xero does have a fairly basic tracking code category, and it only has 2, which always surprised me. But it actually forces you to pick 2 that are really, really meaningful to the business and try to design something that's not going to be overly complicated. And it's only once you have these really complicated requirements that you actually can fully utilize the ERP, right? And if you're a private Australian business, even with international subsidiaries, I think you can find ways around it.
Yeah, great. We've got about 5 minutes left. I'm thinking that we can probably skip the top tip. There's been a ton of gold in this, guys. So, you know, just to ask you to pick one thing that's going to be a highlight is probably unnecessary. We do have a good question in the Q&A. Feel free to keep pushing them through, guys. But so Darren's asked, you know, to your point, Ryan, about delaying ERP as long as possible. We've got a client that is trying to do that, but they're generating 5,000 sales invoices per month. Will Xero experience slowness at this level, or is there a risk that it will crap itself one day and simply stop working? I have a little insight in this, keen to get your thoughts too, but we had a session with Xero earlier in this series, and we had Regan Ashworth from their API team. He knew a lot about the technical Xero limits, that they are soft limits. They aren't necessarily hard limits that will mean tomorrow, you know, you can't use Xero anymore. But there is a size and a scope where you will begin to experience slowness. That doesn't mean there's not ways to circumvent those, I suppose, challenges with apps in the ecosystem. There may be a good reason why you have 5,000 sales invoices going out of Xero versus out of another platform. But have you experienced that, Nathan, yourself? Do you know any good workarounds for something like
that? No, myself, probably not. In most of the organization I worked with, so I'll use Send as an example. Given that the sources of truth for the invoicing sits outside of Xero, so we have our own dealing platform, our own dealing systems, because we're subject to our banking partners, our integration partners. Xero isn't a dealing platform, so we manage our revenue, our trading, and our dealing outside of Xero. And so we use a data warehouse to actually produce the reporting. I haven't done bulk reporting out of Xero. So it's not something I can speak to. So
no, that's right. Ryan, do you have any experience here?
Yeah, it's probably 5,000 is a lot, right? So I probably haven't got to 5,000. I mean, it's a question for Xero, and it sounds like, Jack, you already had that audience a little bit and find out what their breakpoint is. So I'd be going there first, and then look, sometimes you get to this point where you don't have an ERP, but you have a strong CRM and Xero. Like I worked in a business that had Salesforce and then Xero, which sounds quite strange. It's almost like, a beetle towing a yacht, but it's kind of like we got a lot of value out of the CRM and automating contracts and then the invoices, and then that pushed down into Xero. And you have a choice whether you want to put the invoices in Xero and send directly, where you want to have the various invoice numbers, or you want to push it to Xero and then send. So like sometimes, having another CRM rather than an ERP is a half step towards going to a full system-wide implementation where you've got something there that might work. Anonymous attendee. I think HubSpot's the market leader CRM in the sort of mid-market space. Personally, there's a few other smaller ones like Insightly and things like that, but I think that these things aren't cheap. But HubSpot's fantastic. Salesforce is probably still in that sort of icky, did you really need it zone? So I'd just be really mindful of that. But I can't comment on like what the limit on the 5,000 invoices is. That one, but that sounds like a genuine concern that you need to find the answer on.
Yeah, no, I think the only other thing I'd add to that is it does depend on why you've got 5,000 sales invoices going through Xero. For businesses that are e-commerce businesses that might be on something like Shopify with thousands of transactions happening every month, the integration between Xero and Shopify that Xero kind of called out to us on that session was to say, well, we can just bring through a summary of that information each day. You've got the information in there in your general ledger, everything that you need to report on. But if you want the granular level detail of every single transaction that's happened through a day, you've got that sitting there in another system. So it just depends, I guess, on what the reason is. And if you need the 5,000 going through Xero and there's no other way to work around it, then yeah, potentially it is time to, that may be a technical reason why you'd need to be going ERP. Cool. Stian, I just wanted to throw to you for another question we've got here around what is the difference between Join and Fathom? I appreciate this is just one other app that you can compare to. There's probably a few others that people might have questions about, but yeah, feel free to answer this one specifically.
Yeah, look, I think the main difference between Join and Fathom is that Join is a purely reporting app, right? So it's a consolidation and reporting app. It doesn't sort of go across the other features that Fathom has in terms of things like forecasting, benchmarking, detailed analysis of non-financial and financial KPIs. So I tend to think that Join, if you're looking for sort of one solution to one problem, and that is reporting or specifically consolidated reporting, Join does do a very good job at that. But sort of mirroring some of what was said earlier, it's around sort of where you have, in that case, where you get apps that only do one specific things, you tend to very quickly find yourself with a very large tech stack at the end of the day, when you're ending up having one app that does reporting, one that does forecasting, maybe you have one for analysis or benchmarking. So I think for the people, if you like to sort of have more of those functionalities in one of the apps, potentially it can be beneficial to look for more of a broader financial management tool like Fathom.
Cool, good answer. Awesome, thank you. Any other questions, feel free to throw them in. We've got one here. Do you use app XeroLink to manage contracts, e.g. rent maintenance? This is just to help us manage the terms of the contract. Does anyone have any other system they would recommend for that, or any experience here?
I personally don't use Xero for that.
No. Cool.
Yeah, I think it would be Xero personally. No, I think that I don't know of any system that does that. Like you might have franchises that look after franchise agreement expiry dates, and they've got sort of bespoke systems out there. There's a bunch. If it's more like your own contracts there, I mean, I don't know if it's a terrible suggestion, but a good Excel spreadsheet and a bunch of calendar reminders, I think, unless there's something out there, The other thing is, like, when you do your forecast, right, if you're doing good quality forecasting regularly, then you should be, okay, I'm doing my rent forecast. Oh, I know that the rent's going to go up 3.5% next March because that's the automatic renewal. And you're almost like, by doing a forecast, you're thinking about not just the past, but also the forward part as well. So that's always a good thing. People aren't forecasting and you ask them what dates, things they sometimes don't know. So I'd cobble it together that way.
Yeah, no, it sounds like something that can be solved in that sense. Cool. I'll quickly go through. We're just over time by a minute, so very quickly, I just wanted to wrap up, and I want to mention this for anyone who's tuning in who's from Sydney. Please feel free to scan this, because we're hosting a wrap event at Xero's Sydney HQ after the series. So next week, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Sydney time. Would love to see you there. I mean, we've got drinks and nibbles we're putting on. We'll have a bit of a wrap-up discussion with somebody from Xero. We'll have a few of the partners there representing as well. So we'll try and kind of wrap up the series around building enterprise level building an enterprise level system with Xero. We'll try to kind of call out some of the highlights from all of the sessions. If you've been to them, or if you haven't, you'll be able to take something away. But yeah, ultimately just a great opportunity to catch up with us, but also other people like yourselves who are going through these challenges or may have solved one problem but not another. So feel free to join us. We'd love to see you there. Whilst I've gone ahead and shared that, I'll leave that on screen for anyone who wants to scan it and get a ticket. Question here, do you know a good solution that visually shows your forecast versus budget? Is this something that Fathom can do, guys?
I think I can probably speak to that.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately, I think in the way that Lisa here is mentioning, unfortunately, it's not something Fathom can do. If we're talking about sort of the classic sort of statement comparison with actuals, budget, forecast data. What I can say is keep an eye out on a couple of months ahead, and I think you might be surprised on what we have in store.
Okay, cool. No worries. No worries. Anything from you guys?
I can give you a creative solution that does do something like this. You can import the forecast or a budget as a non-KPI into Fathom, and you can do a matching against it. I do a version of this in Fathom right now. So Fathom, I've imported the budget in itself, and that's set for the year. Forecast data is I import as a non-financial KPI, and you can do matching. So it's a creative workaround. It's not the perfect solution, and I don't know what level of granularity you need for that report, but you can utilize it for that purpose. If you get much bigger, you may need to look for another solution. Excel is a fantastic solution because it's so modular, but yeah, creative workaround.
Cool. No worries. Thanks, guys. And Monica in the chat has said that they use Float for this. Obviously, if you want to have a look at them, feel free to go have a look at what the comparison there is with something like Fathom or other tools in the space. So thanks for that, Monica, and good question, Lisa. Appreciate that. So with that, I might wrap it up, guys. We're a little bit over. Before I thank you all for your time, very quickly in terms of what's next. So you've all got a day off tomorrow, so enjoy that, and then hopefully you decided to stick around in the office on Friday for our inventory session that we've got. If you are away, feel free to tune into the recording of that when you've got the time. We've then got next week, strengthening financial controls with Approval Max and preparing powerful forecasts and models. So kind of extending the conversation here around reporting. We'll go a little bit deeper into that forecasting side. And then after that, as I said, 1st of May, see you in Sydney if you're around. If you haven't registered for any of these sessions, apacenterprise.cfotechstack.com. If you're not subscribed to the CFO Tech Stack newsletter, absolutely jump on the CFO Tech Stack website and subscribe to that. Just great, informative kind of tech stacks that are being shared from finance leaders and bits and pieces like that. So if you're in this larger Xero space, it's a great resource. Thank you, Nathan, Stian, and Ryan. I suppose each of you are reachable if people are interested from a fractional CFO perspective or need help with implementing systems, or if you're interested in Fathom. All of these guys are available on LinkedIn. I imagine is probably an easy place to reach you all. Is that right?
Yeah, I would say so.
Absolutely.
Cool. No worries. Well, we'll wrap it there. Thank you very much, guys.